The Branda Herrera and Task and Purpose, also know, Chris Cappy, debate, that's what it says in the title, debate on the Russia-Ukraine war. Brandon Herrera, for those of you who don't know, he's that gun guy on YouTube. You might have seen him from, probably blowing up a target at some point on the internet. He sometimes does different mods, like different video game mods for guns. I saw he had like a Fallout New Vegas mod gun that looked like the service rifle for the NCR that looked pretty cool. And I think he's done that with a few other things as well. A few cool guns. He ran for Congress as a Republican against the incumbent Republican in his district, challenging him from a, I don't know how he defines it, but I would say a MAGA angle. He was coming certainly from the more populist base of the Republican Party. At least that's my classification. He can classify himself as whatever he wants to. And he is on this podcast. And I know he is not in favor of continued aid to Ukraine. He wants to stop the aid, generally for the idea of this is stuff that should be spent at home, not spent abroad. A lot of people would probably object to the way of calling it isolationist, but you can call it, in a sense, the isolationist view of the war, where Chris Cappy is somebody, the head of Task and Purpose. He's been releasing a lot of videos about the war since the start. He has been in favor of aid, generally speaking, from what I know. And they had a little back and forth with a few other people on the show, and I thought, why not check it out? Why not check it out? Instead of watching a bunch of alt media personalities that are just starting to dip their toe in general military affairs, like Crystal Ball saying, we gave the Ukrainians F-16s and now they can invade Kursk. We did that. Like, having some people in the room who are a bunch of veterans who have some general idea about military affairs and probably geopolitics. I assume they're not all Neanderthals who don't know what they're caught in the throes of. It's a nice change of pace. So I wanted to check it out. So let's watch it. Herrera also has a suspicious preference for AK-47s over ARs as well. Just a thing to note. Yeah, well, that's interesting. That's interesting. But then again, look. I can make all the, Russo plant jokes I want about that. But most of what I've been around is AK-74s. And, what is that? I think the longer I'm away from Ukraine, it's going to be, what is it called? Separation makes the heart grow fonder. Distance makes the heart grow fonder. The saying. It's saying something like that. And I think with time, I feel like I'm gonna yearn for the 74. Yearn for it. Okay, let's check it out.
Actually, your videos were almost exclusively.
Too fast. I can't hear. There we go.
In the very beginning of the Russian-Ukraine war, your videos were almost exclusively what I watched. Because when that first kicked off, in the first 2 weeks before we realized, this is just going to be another forever war. I've seen this before.
He never watches my videos, if that makes you feel better.
This is just getting watched. Because when that first kicked off, in the first 2 weeks before we realized, this is just going to be another forever war. I've seen this before.
He never watches my videos, if that makes you
man, I don't want to be such a prissy loser at the start of this. We're just 13 seconds in. But I've expressed before that I'm not a huge fan of the forever war framing in Ukraine. Because to me, number one, the war has been going on for about 2.5 years. Going on 2 3/4. Probably going to go into 3 in a second. Come around February 24th. You could try to extend it with the years prior in the Donbass, but to compare the fighting in the Donbass before to what's happening now, it's two totally separate wars in scale and the weapons being used. Obviously there's an extension. There's one that leads to the other, but from our perspective, most Americans were not that knowledgeable about it, and our involvement was very limited. Some would argue, including me, probably not enough, but 2.5 years going on 3, is that a forever war? We had Vietnam, we had Afghanistan, but we're talking about a decade to going on 2 decades, with no end in sight, local resistance continuing, with no idea of a break in will. There is no feasible path to most observers towards victory in the idea of complete domination of the enemy force. To me, those would be considered. Maybe the war in Yemen as another example, if we don't want to use an America-centric example, even though we were involved in that, obviously, that was an example of Saudi air power and ground offensives just having no progress against the Houthis, either due to the, let's just say, interesting nature of the Saudi ground forces and just not a very effective air campaign. I would say that could be considered a forever war. But this, I don't know. We're going on 3 years. And so I like that. Is that really like a forever war going on 3 years? Forever war in my mind is like 10 years. There's no end in sight. You could say that all the war could risk becoming a forever war, but I don't see it as a forever war. I think that we've gotten too quick to jump on that as a buzzword for every conflict that lasts longer than the Gulf War. That's the first thing. And the second thing is there's a lot of physical barriers, like things that's really hard to work around, that I think limit the extent, if, we continue fighting this out until a peace where it would hopefully not reignite again because of a defense arrangements or otherwise. The war has limitations on armor. The Soviets, Freudian slip. The Russians have a bunch of old Soviet armor that they can't just replenish like that, and they're burning them at immense rates. Out of all the things that Russia is losing at a non-replenishing rate, manpower, they've actually for a lot of months been able to hit just at what they need to get to replenish, of about 25,000 troops per month, while losing about 25,000 troops per month. This month, their losses have been record-breaking, so it's probably going to be more than what they're necessarily recruiting. But you could say that that's a level of sustainability that might be able to continue. But if they recruit everybody they can with high payments, and they have to continue doing that by continuing to increase payments, how sustainable is that? But you could say there's some level of sustainability. Armor, not as much. They burnt through their old ammunition stockpiles. Now they need to bring in North Korean equipment. How long can that last? Probably not in current stockpiles at the current rate. They can probably continue to produce, but they have stockpile limits too. They have their own defense requirements. There's questions of Ukrainian manpower that I think stop it from becoming a forever war. The idea that a war of this intensity going on for 8 years, I don't really see the war as it is today as possible as becoming a forever war, both due to limitations in manpower, armor, ammunition, and the economy. The Russian ruble, after so many different, economic controls, is back to being worth 1 penny. You can go look at it yourself. This is not libtard propaganda, I swear. It's back to being worth a cent. Russian consumer value, as in how much value they have to go out and consume, how much purchasing power they have, it's continuing to go down. They have less free cash to spend. And so I think that, and not to mention the problem with Russian oil refineries not working at a profit. The idea of the war at this intensity extending for 8, 9, 10 years, it's just not possible. I do think that it would be possible that if the war was frozen and then, there wasn't proper protections in place and defense arrangements to stop the war from reigniting again, it could stay a low intensity conflict where there's intermittent shellings and intermittent raids that eventually boils over into another big war. And you could say that could be a possibility of forever war, but that is a possibility down the road that would be dependent upon, I think, really bad diplomatic, geopolitical decisions for the United States. So I don't like the use of this word as a buzzword. I'm sorry, I'm being so rambly already, but I've expressed quite a bit how I'm not a big fan of the word forever war, at least in reference to this war at this stage.
Feel better.
I actually do now. I do now. Okay, USA versus XYZ.
Yeah,
I love it.
We're getting there.
Especially the Z.
Oh, the Z. Yeah, fuck. I got to redo that one now. Thanks.
But like when it was first kicking off, I was watching a lot of your videos because it was very interesting to me. Because I'm looking around. I'm like, does anybody realize how close to World War III we are? This is a big deal.
Dude, I first of all, that means a lot because not to S your D too much, but love watching your videos on all. Big inspiration for a ton of the stuff that I did before that.
I didn't know you knew who I was. So that was kind of cool.
Absolutely. Actually, one time I referenced you very briefly in a video as like a joke in a positive way, and like
Could
always have
negative,
loved. No, I'll send it to you. It was a good thing. It was a good thing. But
He just got used by InfoWars.
I was trying to. I did. Yeah. Check out our appearance on InfoWars. We're on there now, and unless you're a globalist or an elitist, probably not like it.
In that broadcast, Saturday 76 will commence again if you don't watch Task and Purpose.
I love it.
But so actually, it's funny you bring that up because I feel as though I want to.
Can we talk about Nick Fuentes versus Jackson Hinkle? I've never in my life. You know, I don't know. This feels like, you know, Hezbollah fighting ISIS. Can they both lose? Like, I don't know. Like, it's like when he.
A curd is a curd.
They know, like, no matter what happens, if they take swings at each other, everybody wins but them.
Say, like, in the beginning of the war, we all knew so little about what was happening, and I got so much wrong about, like, yeah, you know, I've learned so much since then about how to talk about conflicts at that scale, because I have my experience of what Iraq was like, and we know what like coin operations and counterinsurgency is like, and it's such a different animal from like a high intensity near peer warfare, and it's a very different way you have to talk about it. And I realize now that like the war in Ukraine, it's so much better to talk about those things in terms of, you know, how like the CIA actually talks about it, or how like the FSB talks about it in Russia, which is likelihoods. So it's more, I talk about things more like now saying,
So you hedge.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, no, legitimately.
Yeah.
Like,
well, you have to, because even the top intelligence agencies hedge because they know that there's so many variables that go into a war of that scale that trying to predict them, it's almost more meaningful to say, hey, because North Korean soldiers are deploying to Kursk in Russia, it is highly likely that it will have an impact on the battle in Kursk. And so when I first saw,
Yeah, on the local tactical level. I mean, I think this is a good way to talk about it too.
Morally corrupt,
hello.
bankrupt man.
Kathy 6'1", better than Kathy 60 and 6'2", of course. Thank you very much for the tier 1 and being sub for 37 months. My goodness, you've been in the trenches.
A curd is a curd.
Oh man, another one. Julia Simpson for the 4.99. Dylan, Forever War is Warhammer 40K. We're humanity. Thank you. Okay. Well, then who's the God Emperor? Is it Trump? Has it been Trump really the whole time? Has it been Trump? You know what? The best outcome is that it's Hunter Biden. When it's all said and done, Hunter Biden's in that chair. No one would be happy, except for me. Except for me. Because, you know, people talk about, you know, the joke about Biden 2028, but, you know, I'm thinking about Biden 2028 in a different way. But this is the much better way to talk about the war. At the start of the war, you know, I'm 21. I have never really covered a war as it's happening like this before, as, you know, as a streamer, as a content creator. And I'm learning so much as time is going on. And I'm trying to rely on experts, but the problem was, like, a lot of the experts that are being brought on TV, or a lot of the TV commentators, were saying things in absolutes that ended up just not panning out. John Mearsheimer is an example of this. For example, John Mearsheimer said before the war that if number one, the Russians would never invade because it's against their interests, it would hurt them in XYZ ways, and so they would never do it. They would never do this like full-scale invasion. Okay, well then it happened. So that's one absolute that failed. But if they did, so this is the second thing, the second prediction he's making, it would be over in like a week or two. And then that didn't come to pass. And there's others who have made predictions like this. Of course, there was a lot of predictions of, oh, Ukraine's on the brink of collapse, X, Y, Z. And they were saying that for weeks. And as the war was going on, and I was watching the Battle of Kiev like progress, and I was seeing how much fighting there was over Bucha, how much fighting there was on the outskirts of Kiev, and how much resistance the Russians were having, I was thinking, like, how is it going to be possible that if they're having this much trouble going through these suburbs, they're going to be able to take a city of 3.5 million people with the forces they have now? And like, if they're just like shoving all these troops down this one line, down this road to Kiev, like, how is that an effective they can be bottlenecked. They're being targeted by Bayraktar drones. Bayraktar drones that if they had their air defense systems up, they could have intercepted. The tire rot that Russian soldiers were facing was hurting them, as improperly maintained trucks were having problems transporting goods. They're running out of fuel, they're running out of resources. Troops started looting, which of course, on one hand, like from the civilian perspective, looting is horrible because of the effect it has on civilians, and that's the main frame we talk about it. But for a military commander, looting's bad too, because if you're looting, that means you're distracted. You're dropping strategic objectives. You're dropping defending your point or trying to go to attack the enemy in order to loot and take property and then go transport it and move it away. And that's hours or, possibly a whole day of time that is then wasted. And that is a problem with military discipline. And so all these factors that, were not being originally analyzed or people did not have access to ended up making a lot of experts, quote unquote, with a lot of egg in their face. And this happened time and time again. I mean, who could have predicted that the Wagner Group would turn their guns on their masters, march on Moscow, take Rosvandan, and shoot down airplanes? People forget. Could you imagine an American defense company, American military contractor marching on Washington, D.C., shooting down jets as the president negotiates with them and tries to offer them a deal? Like, it's wild. It's wild. But these are all factors that no one could have even begun to analyze. These are all factors that people couldn't have begun to, list out and say, this is the pathway that's going to happen. Here's the absolute, is going to, this, then this, then this. It's why when I see people say, Ukraine will lose the war, or Ukraine will win the war, or Russia will lose or will win, I immediately, disregard them. Because I feel that there are so many different factors, so many dice rolling at the same time, that you just can't concentrate on them all at the same time, even with the best of best of the available AI algorithms. And so it leads to me seeing these people who talk in absolutes and holding them in very low standing. Hey, MS India, MS Indipa, Indipa? I don't know how to say your name. Either way, thank you for the primer. Appreciate it.
Saw the invasion of by Russia, I talked about things more in an absolutist point of view. So I've learned a lot since then about
Imagine day 3 of this war as they're marching on Kiev. You go in a little time machine and you're like, yes, the next battle has begun. Oh, what battle? The Battle of Kursk? Oh, did we go backwards in time? No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Just there's no way anyone could have predicted these things.
Yeah, and so to me, I've always learned, my family always told me that talking about politics is impolite, and I agree. But my way around it now is talking about geopolitics is a little bit easier, because American interests are the same kind of almost no matter who is in office. So I at the channel, I talk about it from a point of view of just American interests.
Because that's what I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit, and I'm sure the comment section will tell me I'm wrong if that is the case, but I feel like you come at it from a relative impartiality, where you're not playing left-right politics. You're just kind of hey.
Is that a White Claw and a rum and Coke, or is that just a Coke and I'm just thinking like an alcoholic?
This is what's happening. They're here. Their best move is this, but they're probably going to do this. And then that's kind of your breakdowns.
I try to be upfront about my bias. So we're from the same generation. We're all
here's just one example of this absolutist thinking, right? If somebody was to say Russia has more shells than Ukraine, Russia has more men than Ukraine, Russia has more reserves and armor than Ukraine, they're currently moving forward, therefore eventually the Ukrainian front line is going to collapse, and these are the factors that you bet upon. And then when the North Koreans come over, you're like, oh my god, wow, man, the cards are stacking against Ukraine. But then you turn around and then you see, for example, an outgoing Biden administration with 2 months left in the office, lame duck presidency, leaning into the powers he has the most influence over still, and making decisions on long-range strikes. And then after these decisions on long-range strikes, which I think the effect of would be limited, I think it would have a diplomatic impact. I think it would show an amount of resolve that could have an impact in negotiations. It can have some impact in storage units and making the Russians have to pull some stuff back. But most of the impact on air power is already negated because the Russians have had enough time to move most of their air power back. But then you see the Biden administration work to get the South Koreans to do an indirect shell transfer through the United States to Ukraine and standardize a flow of those shells over to the Ukrainians. Because I think the odds of them changing the South Korean laws in order to make it so they could send it to you, I don't think that's likely. I don't think it's likely because the current Japanese leadership has like a 17% approval rating, and I don't think that they're going to be able to convince the opposition to change it. But if they're able to shovel those shells into Ukraine, that could really change the shell disparity. That really could. And then you talk about factors like the Russian economy, which are kind of always a little bit in flux, but have general trends which are not necessarily positive. And then in the long term, you could see if certain decisions are made, the cards can change in how they're stacked. And so but I can't say that that's going to happen because the dice are still rolling. And so making these hard predictions for the future, I think it's largely for, what's the word? I don't want to use the word con men, but I think it's for people who want to go punchy and sound confident. And if they sound punchy, confident, and they convince you that they believe what they're saying, then that can feel convincing. And therefore you can feel like you have a grasp on the world, you have a grasp on the war, and therefore you have this truth that you can base upon your decision making around the war, when you really can't.
I'm 35, like we're all around that age, right? Yeah. I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh, listening to like, what do you call it? AM radio. And I loved it. And I felt as though I wished a little bit more that in the media, people would just be upfront about like where they're coming from, because I feel as though everyone has a bias and a point of view. So I've tried to approach it from, hey, I'm gonna put my cards on the table. Like, yes, I am pro-American.
I mean, don't get me wrong, my job is more the comedy aspect, and I know where my place is in the scheme of all this. Is I make a joke about something using a little bit of facts, a little bit of artistic liberty, but I've noticed that a lot of people will see that and be like, well, what is he talking about? And then they go and they find your type of content or something along.
I'm pretty open about my partisan nature, people know what party I'm registered in. It's pretty open. I say which candidates I support in elections. I talk about political issues. And I also, that does extend to like geopolitics, about what I think the United States should do. And I worried a lot that going here and trying to do journalism or, living history, whatever you want to call it, and recording all of this, that previous, level of partisanship, I guess you can call it, or level of political distinction, whatever you want to say, could undercut the credibility of my reporting, because people would just see me as a partisan hack, and therefore they wouldn't be able to take anything I'm saying seriously, especially if I'm coming from the perspective that, which I'm open about, I think we should support Ukraine, and I think we've had some failures in supporting Ukraine. And the failures that I have in supporting Ukraine is not, we should have been more lukewarm in our support. And because of that, I was worried that people would not be able to look at my reporting and be like, well, Dylan reported that Ukraine, did X, Y, and Z in this battle, but can we really believe that? Because he's basically United 24 state media. But my thinking is this: if I pretended that I wasn't a partisan and I came here and I tried to do it just like old style Edward R. Murrow, black and white TV, look into the screen and just list out the facts. But even he didn't shy from giving an opinion. Maybe that was a bad example. But some old style TV news presenter, and I just listed fact after fact after fact and didn't let my viewpoint enter it at all, I feel like I'd almost be lying. Not only would I feel like I'm kind of covering up my perspective, but my perspective affects my coverage. From the moment I choose the frame of what I'm focusing on, my bias is showing. The fact that I have decided to focus on making my next piece on resistance in Sumy, and I decided to take a moment to talk about the bombing of Dnipro Hospital and why soldiers are signing these shells for Dnipro or for the hospital that was struck. I'm showing a bias of some sort. I'm showing that I think this is important for you to see. I think that this is an important aspect And it's showing through as an important aspect for why I think Ukraine should be supported. Of course, I'm more of an ideologue than others. You could say I don't like it when hospitals get bombed. Okay, very partisan viewpoint there. But from the moment I choose to frame, my bias is showing. So I'd rather be open about the bias, but do my best to make sure that bias does not tilt my judgment and make me deny the reality in front of me. I.e., what? I don't think Soldovi's gonna fall. Soldovi's gonna stay. When it was obvious it was probably gonna fall once it started to get surrounded or coping and seething about a situation that's bad. I've done my best to make sure that when we talk about the war, we say that right now the situation is really difficult for Ukraine at the front. I'm not going to buy into the doomers who are out there saying the front is collapsing, it's all over, etc., etc. Of course not. I'm not going to buy into that because it's not true, and I think they're being hyperbolic and fearmongers, but you got to just make sure that bias doesn't like undercut your ability to be at least impartial in analyzing the facts.
Along those lines where they're like, okay, now I'm educated on what's going on. So like mine, ultimately, I just kind of filter in, but I've also realized that not so much just like your own individual bias, like, America first or this, whoever you promote, it's oftentimes your perspective can differ based off of like past experiences. So like my brain works in a tactical sense. So like tactically, $200 billion, zero American lives to reduce 95% of Russia's pre-war military. That's a tactical decision, and that makes sense to me. But then there's people who look at it, let's say, from a political perspective, or like, Americans are not, they're struggling to get funding during hurricanes and stuff like that. And it kind of pits some of us against each other a little bit in that aspect, because I look at it through a tactical perspective. You look at it maybe a little bit more political. You look at it through a law enforcement perspective or something along those lines. But that can also be a huge difference there. So
anytime my perspective gets labeled political, I'm like, I just thought it made sense.
Yeah, like not to make it political, but it's definitely true that aid to Ukraine, like, so I'm kind of for.
We're just pause it here for a moment because he's gonna shill for Ukraine for a bit. I really don't know how I felt about the connection of aid to Ukraine to natural disaster response, or the connection of aid to Ukraine to veteran homelessness, or the connection of aid to Ukraine to whatever the social ill is. If there's a social ill in the United States, Ukraine has been probably blamed for it, or aid to Ukraine has been blamed for it at some point. And the general idea is, why are we spending money on XYZ foreign country when we could be spending money here? Now, I think a lot of this kind of is separated from the reality of the type of aid we're sending, because we're sending old, to be honest, a bunch of equipment that my grandfather used in Vietnam, a lot of it. The M113 troop carriers I see all the time near the front, those are from the Vietnam era, and we were never going to put our troops in M113s and send them to the front. And if we are putting our troops in M113s and sending them to the front, then the situation in the United States is unbelievably desperate, and the aliens must have landed and they're outside of DC or something. And so making it like, oh my gosh, it's either send Ukraine this M113 or do proper hurricane response, when I feel like these two things are separated. It's true that there's still money involved, and if you want to produce the newer weapons and then send them over, that there's money involved there. But I've always viewed it as like a walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, that we're pitting two things against each other that don't necessarily needed to be pitted against each other. And I think a lot of it is just for, honestly, partisan political purposes. Like you could make a case against Ukraine aid that is completely separate from the disaster response in North Carolina. And I think you should, if you want to, make a case against it, because they're two separate issues.
Made sense.
Yeah, like not to make it political, but it's definitely true that aid to Ukraine, like, so I'm kind of for it. I'm into it. I feel it. But at the same time, I feel like people who pretend like it's not, that there's no cost to it, that like it doesn't take away from things in America, like that's a little bit naive. Yeah, true. If you're going to spend a shitload on the military and you're going to spend on foreign aid, like it's going to take away from America.
Friendly reminder, the United
Yeah, it'll take away from America. That's true. If you spend money on a shell instead of a new school, then there's a question about return on investment. Like, yes, that shell, produced in the United States, by the way, is going to help employ a person, is going to help inject money into an American company, and it's going to help expand our production capacity when we were obviously not prepared for the reintroduction of large-scale mechanized warfare in interstate conflict. If we were, we would have had the shell production capacity ready. But the way that we've been fighting wars, it's been, precision missiles to take out, fucking Osama in a cave, right? It hasn't been, Osama with 100,000 of his buddies on BMPs riding. No, it's been totally different. And so the defense infrastructure that we built and the margins that these defense companies were going for, where they were trying to turn a profit for their investors, meant that they didn't have much of an incentive to build shells that many of them thought they were going to detonate in 20 years. And so by producing in these by making these investments in these artillery companies, in these, shell production, stuff like that, I still think it benefits America by making them, safer. Or if we're going to spend so much on our defense, we should at least be able to ramp up production for crucial artillery shells. NATO standard 155 artillery shells, which the entire alliance uses. So I do think it brings stuff back to the United States, not to mention like economic stability in Europe, one of our main export markets, also an import market, that we have deep scientific ties to, economic ties to, and, long-standing geopolitical ties too. If we want to work with them to stand up for, freedom of navigation or whatever in the South China Sea, then you're probably going to want European support on that and any diplomatic initiative. But if we're not prioritizing their security in the way they prioritized ours after 9/11, then how can you expect for them to pivot with us towards Asia? Or definitely since, countries like Germany, they already got a lot of economic woes right now. And do they really want the repercussions of possible, the Chinese trying to strangle them economically or, put some pressure on them economically? And so I do think there are also benefits for the United States. I mean, since the inception of the country, one of the main roles of the president, if not the main crucial role of the president, is commander-in-chief, defense of the nation. It's like the first basic thing. That's not to say the other things don't matter, but, it's the first basic thing. It is true that pretending that, a shell is necessarily the best thing to spend on versus a school if you only have this much money, that's delusional. But I do think that there is also benefits for the United States in this, yeah. The schools were already being underfunded and they won't receive those funds or resources either way. Well, they're not going to receive the 113s, but if we're talking about producing weapons and then giving them to the Ukrainians, money could have been sent to the school instead. Now, under our current system, and with the way it's going, I don't think that would have happened. I don't think there's going to be a bill that's like, this money would have gone to Ukraine, but now it's going to go here. But I think you get my purpose. Like, economic production-wise, what's going to be giving us the best return on investment? Building a new school or building 10,000 to 20,000 new artillery shells? That equation I still think should be calculated because you're not going to get the same return on investment. And I think a return on investment on a school is, generally speaking, going to be bigger. Now, if those artillery shells are stopping war from spilling into all of Europe and bringing our troops overseas and getting all the boys killed, I think return on investment on the latter might be better in certain situations, obviously.
The United States gives more foreign aid to everybody else in the world than everybody else in the world combined every year.
Right. Yes.
We just gave $1 million to Vietnam. I don't know if you guys know that.
Oh, yeah.
For the hurricane. Yeah.
That's something that and I'll put this out there as somebody from an opposite perspective who doesn't like a lot of Ukraine funding and things like that. And yes,
this is actually good.
Probably one of the best arguments I've ever heard in favor of that. It's like, okay, if we're spending so much on defense spending, it's to weaken our strategic enemies.
Can I also just throw out there, I feel like the foreign aid question is kind of, I understand that we spend money on foreign aid and we spend a lot more than other countries on foreign aid, but our federal government budget is gigantic. And if you look at a total percentage of our federal budget, what's being spent on foreign aid, the stuff that's actually listed as the foreign aid that he was talking about, like the humanitarian aid to Vietnam, is a tremendously small percentage of the budget. I do think that probably cost cutting in other areas would be more effective. Now, if you're going to talk about, for example, military bases in Europe and stuff like that, cost equation changes. But when we're talking about, disaster aid, I do think that the diplomatic weight and leverage it gives us is, generally speaking, worth the benefit. Plus, it's cool if we help people not drown. But I mean, that's different than the interests of the United States.
And if we can do that without spending any American lives, like I totally understand. And not only that, but a lot of our weapon systems that we currently have been built with the idea of taking out the weapon systems that for the first time in human history are in play. And we can see how those weapon systems do against those, like, you know, Russian tanks, Chinese, like, stuff like that.
We have
like
learned
equipment.
so much.
Yeah. And while I don't agree with it necessarily to a degree of like, hey, let's not maybe spend $500 billion doing that, I understand.
My God, $500 billion. Man, if we sent $500 billion to Ukraine, we'd have Zelensky would be in a GoBot marching on Kursk right now.
Understand the argument. It makes sense to a degree.
So let me reduce that argument even further, because like, here's what I'll say about it is that it's not even like $1 trillion. It's 26 billion that in terms of like cold hard cash that we're sending to Ukraine over 3 years, it's 26 billion.
But
the Europeans have sent like tremendously more when it comes to financial aid. The way the equation is currently, the United States producing weapons here or sending old reserves has sent the vast majority of military aid. And like for this year, I think the Pentagon said like, oh my God, I forget 67% of interceptors, 60% of like explosive munitions. Like I forget the exact percentage. It was like 83% in one category. I forget what category it was. But we generally are backing the military side of it. While if you go to Europe, in total value of what has been sent over, they've actually sent more, and it's been much more concentrated on the financial side. The Europeans had the Shell Initiative, which was super late. The Czechs had the 500,000 Shell Initiative as well. There has been, of course, the Leopards that have been sent over. There's been other military aid, but it's been largely financial. The EU going in to support Ukraine. And they have, through the financial aid, in the small amount of military aid, they've overcome the United States by a decent margin in total value of aid sent over.
Factoring in equipment and everything.
Right. So then you have to factor in how much does the equipment cost, which is equipment that we were going to like get rid of anyway and offload anyway. And it actually costs more to hang on to. But I wouldn't even look at it in terms of like weakening the enemy, because to me, that's a weak argument. Like, let's weaken the enemy. That to me isn't even worth it.
That hurt. All right.
I mean, well, no, sorry. I didn't mean it.
Dude, this is my
The only thing that you argued is fucking bullshit.
The best part is all the difference.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't.
No, you're good, dude. I'm fucking.
Didn't mean it that way.
This is great. I
a
love
couple
this.
of claws
To
deep,
me, that
and I'm-
sounds like somebody that is a homosexual.
Yeah,
but,
that's all right.
Like, oh! No, but it is good. You have like difference of opinion. You shaking your head no to what Brandon is saying is, look, we're not killing each other crazy. But expand onto what you're talking about. Like, break that down.
So, to me, it's more about, if I'm going to be honest with you guys right now, can I?
Love it.
I'm going to say that I don't mean this. Can I say that I don't mean this? But like, America is an empire. It is an empire. We're an empire, guys. Like, we are a friggin' empire. We are everywhere. We have bases, 800 bases all over the world. We are an empire. And what happens to an empire when we retreat? When an empire retreats, when an empire is like, I'm done, like I'm out. And so you look at the British Empire when they were unable to protect the Suez Canal. When you look at the Dutch Empire when they fell apart. When you look at the Ottoman Empire. Any empire that's unable to protect their foreign interests, they fall apart. And what happens to them after that is that their currency falls apart. And their currency is usually like the reserve currency of the world. And right now the dollar is the reserve currency. So my argument is that if we are an empire, which
We are.
I feel like we're an empire. If you let that fall apart, to me, I look at foreign aid like as an insurance policy. It sucks to pay your car insurance. I hate paying my car insurance. But when I need to get into the left lane and I I fucking cut that guy off and I hit him, and it wasn't my fault, officer. But
This got real.
God damn it, I fucking totaled my BMW and
God damn it, Tammy! I just want to see my kids.
This just got real serious.
guys, we are an empire, okay? And if we don't invest in this empire and it falls apart and the dollar dies, we are in trouble.
Can I counter that on
Yeah,
top?
absolutely.
There's also a difference between an empire. Well, acknowledging that we are an empire versus what we should be doing. Should we be an empire? Should we be spending all this money in these foreign places versus should we be structuring our entire economy? And if we're going to be stealing money from the average American taxpayer to fund certain things, is that where it should be going? Or should we be strengthening our own economy and establishing the dominance of the dollar through peace and trade versus through foreign interests that have nothing to do with us?
But I mean, that assumes that like trade and peace, number one, peace is good to have, but a lot of times, even if you want to pursue it, that is not the conditions of the world. Like, I remember there was this description of the presidency or like leading a country. I think Mark Twain did it or something, and it really had an impact on me. It's the idea of you guiding down the country down a river, and you're on a boat or on a log, and when you're leading the country, it's not as far as I want to do X, Y, Z all the time, and so these are my priorities, so this is what we're going to do. If a rock is in front of you in the river, you got to move the log away. You got to move out of it. You got to avoid the different barriers. And whether or not you want there to be a rock there's a rock there and you have to deal with it. Whether you want there to be a global pandemic, there's a global pandemic, you got to deal with the economic consequences of it. You got to deal with the fact that you want to try to avoid a recession. What type of spending, what type of economic plan are you going to do to get rid of it? Did Trump really want to deal with the last year of his term with the global pandemic? Probably not. But he had to. It was because it's what happened. And so when it comes to war, I a lot of times view wars sometimes like that. Definitely if wars like this where the Russians invaded Ukraine after multiple diplomatic efforts to stop it. It was a war that was forced on the United States, and considering American interests in Europe, considering the agreements that we made with the Ukrainians before, and of course the fact that the Ukrainians actually looked like they had a decent chance of not immediately collapsing, that this war was brought upon us, and so we have to deal with the situation as is. I mean, you can try to just check out of the situation, but then we cannot be surprised at the consequences, both in the hurt of American credibility after making these arrangements. I mean, or I don't want to get into the specific details of the Budapest Memorandum, and the effect of, wait 1 second. Give me a second. I got a message from Danabo. Important question. Who's winning, Tyson or Paul? I'm going to say Tyson just because I want it to be Tyson, okay? Paul's a younger man. He probably has a lot more energy. He can probably go a lot further than Tyson can.
Burns
but if Tyson can get him early,
morally corrupt.
it'll be a good night.
Man.
It'll be a good night. Mr. Robotovi, thank you so much for becoming a YouTube member. I appreciate that. Where was I? I got thrown off by the Tyson thing. But Tyson can hit. The thing is, as a heavyweight, the last thing you lose is power. There's a reason why Foreman was able to come back so long afterwards and still become heavyweight champion of the world again. Is because even if you look up that fight to that point, he was getting, when he became heavyweight champion again, Foreman, he was getting creamed the whole fight. And at the end, boom, one hit and he won it. And it was over. Tyson's is old though. He's in his 50s. Yeah, 58. He's 58 years old. And it is a ridiculous age to be re-entering fighting. Then again, he's Iron Mike Tyson. So, I mean, I just, what am I going to tell Iron Mike Tyson about boxing? What am I going to tell him about it? So we'll see what happens. Where was I? I've completely lost my train of thought.
The dollar through peace and trade.
Oh yeah, the peace and trade. So a lot of times it's when we talk about like peace and trade, peace is sometimes something you want but you can't necessarily have because of conditions until you work to build peace, which sometimes means, winning at hitting certain goalposts. For example, stopping the Russian advances and making it so they can't really afford to continue the war, so we can build a long-term security arrangement that stops the Russians from invading again. If we just quickly try to freeze the conflict to get out, and then the Russians invade again, and then the Europeans are dealing with security crises in Europe, again, one of our main export markets, one of our main import markets, we can't pretend that doesn't impact us. I mean, when the Ukrainians got invaded, the impact that had on global wheat prices was pretty negative. Not to mention, like, if a lot of the bases that we do have is to protect international waterways that are important for trade. And we have now seen through the Houthis' missile launches and drone attacks how that could stymie global trade. And while some people can think about like a boat blowing up here or a boat blowing up there, and they're like, oh, who cares? It's just a single boat. So I lost one iPhone or something. No, it's not about the single boat. It's about the increased insurance costs, which are going to be passed down to the consumers who are going to have to pay more to trade these goods. And as much as people like to think we can just make everything in the United States, we are not Juche, okay? We're not North Korea. We import a lot of stuff. Try to grow coffee beans in Florida and see how that works. Or actually, even better, maybe, I don't know, Maine, Vermont. We're going to have to import some stuff, especially the inputs for the high-level manufacturing that if we're going to bring manufacturing to the United States, I'd like us to be doing. I don't want us to be making pencils. I mean, if we make pencils, that's cool. You know, microchips and the higher tech stuff would be cool.
Versus through foreign interests that have nothing to do with us.
Dude, that's the multi-billion-dollar question, because you're absolutely...
I would say out of all the continents that we should be interested in, if something happens, number one, it's our own backyard, South America, which I really wish both the Trump and or Harris campaign clearly defined South American foreign policy, as in like coming out and saying this is what we're going to do because it's a direct backyard, and trade with Canada and Mexico is obviously one of the most paramount issues for the United States when it comes to our long-term economic prosperity, just due to our geographic proximity. But also I think Europe and Asia are the other really two big ones. Africa's rising, but Europe, because of our long-term relationship and commitment we made with them, that makes them, generally speaking, a very reliable ally. In a world where there are a lot of places we don't have reliable allies. We have allies that flip this way, flip that way. And of course, Asia, which there's this constant talk about the pivot there. So I don't know. I feel like you can make an argument if peace and trade, peace under what conditions? You have to work for peace, which sometimes means struggling through a war, and trade under what conditions? Because you also need to protect global waterways. And if you don't, and for example, don't have freedom of navigation around the world, and you don't uphold international maritime law, you can end up getting strong-armed by your competitors.
Absolutely right. This is what I think no one can prove, which is that what is more beneficial from the American interest point of view? Like, is it more, so we gain, I think we can agree.
Both see the other side.
I think we can agree that we gain a lot by having so many people dependent on us, for instance. Like, Europe is dependent on us for security, and we get a lot for
Proved that a couple times.
Yeah.
Back-to-back champions.
So what I'm saying is, like, we get a lot for that. We're able to use sanctions we're able to use our money as a weapon. Our money is like more powerful than a bomb. When we use our sanctions, we can kill more people with our sanctions than we can with a bunker buster.
And Geneva bitches less about it than we do it.
Right. So
it's really
we
cool.
Looking at you Canadians.
throw so much weight in the UN, and like we can just fuck around. We do what we want. We're on top. Holy shit. But then there's the other side of the argument, which is like,
I like Cappy.
would it be better?
This is like, because you're breaking down both sides so well. Fucking love it, dude. I fucking love it.
So the other side of the argument is that, so we benefit a lot from that.
By the way, if you guys, this is the type of stuff why I think Tyson might be just something else. Look at this quote from Tyson. Hey, life isn't over yet. We're still fighting. We only make it out on the day of our death. There's no way I should be here talking to you right now. All my friends are dead. They OD'd, they had AIDS. Me and my friend both had sex with this girl at the same time, and they both died of AIDS. I didn't catch AIDS. Raw, too. He's different, man. He's built different. He's something else. He's a machine. He's a machine. Did you guys see that Tyson quote where he's talking to that little girl about death? It's Tyson death. Or Tyson, let me look up little girl. Tyson little girl. Because I think that's the only way I could find it on Twitter. Because everybody's talking about he's interviewing a little girl. Here it is. Here it is. Here it is. Here it is.
Return to the ring. For this fight, you are setting a monumental opportunity for kids my age to see the legend Mike Tyson in the ring for the first time. So after such a successful career, what type of legacy would you like to leave behind when it's all said and done?
Well, I don't know. I don't believe in the word legacy. I just think that's another word for ego. Legacy doesn't mean nothing. That's just some word everybody grabbed onto. Someone said that word and everyone grabbed on the word, so now it's used every 5 seconds. It means absolutely nothing to me. I'm just passing through. I'm going to die, and it's going to be over. Who cares about legacy after that? What a big ego. So I'm going to die. I want people to think that I'm this, I'm great. No, we're nothing. We're just dead. We're dust. We're absolutely nothing. Our legacy is nothing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That is something that I have not heard before, someone say that as an answer.
Can you really imagine somebody say, I want my legacy to be this way when you're dead? Why do you want somebody, you think somebody really wants to think about you? What's the audacity? I think, I want people to think about me when I'm gone. Who the fuck cares about me when I'm gone? Well, my kids, maybe, or grandkids. Who the fuck cares?
Man, it's impossible to filter Tyson. Impossible.
Certainly benefit a lot from being the top.
He's right though.
Dogs, but the other side of the argument, which is that what you're arguing for, is that we would actually benefit more from allocating that money differently, which I don't think you can prove. Like, I don't think you can, like, if you're lying if you say you can prove one way or the other. Because, okay, if we were to invest all that money in America instead, it would just change the game radically from how we've been doing it. So well, to be honest, I can't say.
It's like you say you report on stuff now where it's like, well, it's most likely going to do this, but you don't know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I will say from a historical sense, and again, I'm a student of history. I pay a lot of close attention to everything that happens in history. And it sucks. Like, I totally agree with you. We don't want to pay all this goddamn money to keep everybody stable. We don't want to. We don't want to send all this aid. Like, I would much rather, I am a huge, like, person when it comes to, like, take care of fucking Americans. I'm huge on that. But I also understand, like you guys are talking about, taking care of Americans also means taking the fight to the enemy's front door before they come here. I also, but historically, whenever we enter into isolationism, which is the early 1900s, and again in the 1930s, a world war broke out. Somebody pulled us in every single time the United States entered into isolationism. Like, we're going to just do our own thing. You guys fuck off.
I'll also put this out there. When you're talking about empires, empires usually fail when they overexpand and they're unable to provide for their own. And that's why they collapse. That's why they retreat. That's why they pull back. Not because they voluntarily pulled back, but because they couldn't, but because they had problems at home.
Yes.
And they couldn't financially afford the empire they built.
So do you want to know what the greatest argument for me was? Actually, I saw it was a tweet that you made, actually, Cody. You were talking about
which tweet was it?
Sorry,
I think the thing that baffles me though about, like, the finance angle is, in this war we don't have troops stationed in Ukraine, which holds back costs. We don't have bases in Ukraine, which holds back costs. We don't have to pay for any of the wounded soldiers or any of course the more horrific aspects of war. And the amount of money we've invested is between about 110 to 150 billion. Compared to other wars, definitely when you consider the scale of the conflict in Ukraine, I don't know, it doesn't, definitely when you look at the value of these weapons we're sending over, and a lot of them are being evaluated at their original manufacturing price, even though they're 50, 60, 70 years old, and if you sold them on the arms market, you would not be able to sell them at the rates that we're sending them over for. I feel like if we're trying to make the government much more cost effective, the war in Ukraine is one thing you could do to try to bring back all these old weapons. I just don't see it as a major drain on, like, America's global resources. I think there's specific resources that it is a drain on. For example, the artillery shell stockpiles. But the government and Lloyd Austin has fought very hard to make sure that we don't lower our military readiness. Even if someone could make the argument in certain circumstances, and I would even make it, even if it's kind of radical, that reducing military readiness temporarily to deal with the largest threat to European stability since the end of the Second World War, that's my opinion, of course, you don't need to agree with it, I think could be warranted.
I shouldn't say it. Basically, what really it was about is like all these people from these hurricanes got victims of these hurricanes, and like they're getting $750 or something. I'm like, something is broken here, obviously. Like, if we're unable to provide for our own people, Like, no matter what benefit that we get from foreign aid, and I'm for foreign aid, this is someone saying, from the perspective of someone who's for, like, foreign aid, something is...
But this is the thing that scares me, though. Imagine if we just stop... Again, I said this again earlier, but if we just stop the aid, and then we don't help the people, and all we've done is reduced our influence on the world, while not helping our own people, and then the situation's just worse all around. Especially if the conflicts that are started by us pulling back... cause resource shortages or supply chain problems, which then has downstream effects on the United States. Which then makes it even harder to pay for the things that we wanted to pay for in the first place. It's variables on top of variables.
Broken if we're not also able to like provide for Americans.
I did want to I did want to actually ask about that because I got caught up same tweet because people started tagging me in your tweet about your mom, and it's because I kind of took that hard stance about like, well, this is where the money is allocating. If you pay attention to the bills, like the vast majority of it goes right back into the U.S. economy. Like we're paying ourselves for our own shit, and shout out to Zach, veteran with a sign. Love that dude. I called him and we had a long conversation. He's like, sometimes you don't see the forest through the trees. And I was like, what do you, and you know, I took a step back and I looked at all the facts and everything was coming out. And what I had, I don't know, fucking red pilled myself into is the federal government said that they were delivering this. Like they had a list of things that they were delivering to the.
Also, I don't want to like get too dug in the deep here because I think if no one could make the argument to me we should help the hurricane victims more, and I'm gonna say no, they don't deserve more. You're not gonna make me say that ever. But if I remember correctly, the $750 that we give originally from FEMA was like immediate relief for those who needed food, water, and essentials to survive after they had lost everything. It was not, this is the only assistance you're going to get, goodbye, if I remember correctly. But, you know, I'm not an expert in disaster response, so I can't tell you.
The American South.
Immoral, morally corrupt, bankrupt man. Thank you so much, son of a cow, for the 52-month resub. My goodness. You've been with us for a while. Months, crazy all that, crazy all the stuff that's happened in that time. Honestly, we went from hosting panels to reporting on Warzone. We made quite a jump. We've made quite a jump. This channel has gone through some adventures. I can't take anyone seriously who drinks White Claw. It's not my drink. It's not my drink. But I'm not much of a drinker. I'm much more of a smoker. If I do drink, I don't know. I like a whiskey, I guess. But then I'll drink very little. I don't like to heavy drink. Not much of a drinker.
But you know what I didn't listen to was the people who fucking.
I do like a hard lemonade. Okay, that's a weakness. That's a fruity weakness of mine.
There and weren't getting it. That's where like so I was like, hey, they're taking.
Wait, and I do like hard cider. Okay, we're gonna keep pausing every 3 seconds, and I'm gonna keep listing alcohols I actually do like, and by the end of this, I'm gonna be having to enter into rehab.
They got all this shit, and that's when I backpedal. I was straight up like, I don't normally apologize when it comes to social media, but I immediately backpedaled like, look, I was wrong. I thought you guys were getting all of this that I saw, and you're fucking not. Like that's where I had to take a big step back, eat that humble pie, and be like, okay, we fucked up. Something's fucked up.
Well, Brandon, let me ask you, do you think that, okay, you made a great point. It was like when empires overextend. Yeah. Do you feel like maybe we're like overextended at this point?
I feel like when we can't afford to pay the interest on the debt we've already borrowed, we are hyperextending. And the people that are paying the price are the people that are paying the price of inflation, radical inflation. We're continuing to borrow money from our enemies. We are weakening ourselves. And the one thing that we have going on in the global economy is the American dollar, the USD. And when you have things like BRICS, like alliances of, Brazil, Russia, India, China, like our enemies are actively forming against us right now economically. And our number one priority is weakening the American dollar to pay for an empire we can't afford. I feel like that's an issue. And I feel like we need to be spending that money here at home and cutting costs and figuring out how we raise our, start American growth all over again. That to me is a bigger priority, is figuring out how to grow American jobs, how to grow. I feel like I'm back on the campaign trail right now, and it's really giving me PTSD a little bit.
This is like I came for the cum and I stayed for the geopolitics.
Where do I vote for you? How do I?
Let me interject.
I think the main holder of foreign U.S. debt is Japan, if I remember correctly. I would have to go back and check. Yeah, I just don't remember. But on the BRIC, I'm not going to argue against fiscal responsibility. Okay, I'm a Democrat. Spend, spend, spend. You know what? The BRIC stuff, I don't know how much I buy it, and I don't mean to say that there's not people who want a competitor to the U.S. dollar, but like, when people are afraid of global economic instability, they go and they buy U.S. bonds. And the reason they go and buy U.S. bonds, like, remember we went down in our credit rating, and the way the world reacted was like, oh my gosh, that's scary. Let's go buy more U.S. bonds. This is a safe investment. So right now, I still think that the U.S. dollar and, you know, American credibility when it comes to its financial institutions, like the Federal Reserve, which has helped give a level of independence that Russia and China cannot compete with when it comes to their financial institutions, and if they wanted to be the world reserve currency. Now, that's an argument for the Federal Reserve. I know some people don't like that, but it is what it is. Lead me to believe that I don't know how competitive they could be in offering an alternative. Plus, they don't really have exact guidelines on how it would work. For example, like the Chinese want people to trade in their own local currencies. The Russians want the ruble to be the competitor. Big surprise, but if the ruble's going down in value right now, the ruble now worth about a penny, I don't think it's going to be the big competitor to the American dollar. And if you were to see world reserve currencies around the world, like in order, or like the currency rates, it's like, number one, it's America, then it's it's the euro, and then you got, I think, the Japanese yen, and then I think it's the Canadian dollar, then you get to the Chinese, and then you get to the Australian dollar. And until the BRICS offers a competitor, instead of just adding a bunch of new members and having conferences and an investment bank that is basically just the Chinese investment bank, because it's like 80% Chinese money, I don't know if BRICS is really a serious alternative. It's at least an expression, and this is what I will acknowledge, it's at least a serious expression of a desire for an alternative, and that in and of itself needs to be explored and examined. But the idea that, like, there's an imminent, like, BRICS takeover of the US dollar as the status for world reserve currency, I do not buy. I do not buy that. I mean, I think this is something that in the next 30, 40 years, though, you know, obviously, give it more time to develop, maybe an alternative will show. Not saying it's not a long-term threat, just saying that the way people talk about it, it's like an asteroid a week away or something.
One thing before you jump on that, and this is conspiracy theory. I've stated this before, conspiracy theory. I have nothing to back this up, no facts.
Freaking globalist.
A lot of people are talking about like World War III. Do you think right now it has already started just economically and not militarily?
I think it's been started since the end of World War II.
All right.
Financially speaking?
Yeah, I'll prescribe to that because, like...
Not militarily, like financially speaking.
I was going to agree. I mean, I would even say militarily, especially with... Russia. So when North Koreans...
What? Wait, I'm sorry. I think I might be misanalyzing something. Let me hear that again.
War III. Do you think right now it has already started just economically and not militarily?
I think it's been started since the end of World War II.
All right.
Financially speaking?
Yeah, I'll prescribe to that because, like...
I mean, like, in the Cold War, there were separate financial institutions. I mean, I guess you could say, but I don't know if I'd call it like a war. I get what they're trying to get at about, like, financial institutions in conflict, in spheres of financial influence. But I mean, that's an extended economic war for going 1945 to 2024 and ongoing. I think it kind of removes the purpose of calling it World War III, no? Because then at that point you should just say, like, always and forever. It's not World War I, World War II, World War... It's just, there's always this level of economic war going on constantly.
Like, financially speaking.
I was going to agree. I mean, I would even say militarily, especially with... Russia. So when...
Wait, World War III's been going on since World War II? Militarily speaking? I must be the idiot here, misanalyzing something or mishearing something.
North Koreans were deployed to Russia. That then,
which we didn't even talk about that at all. I want to hear you fucking talk about this.
So that tied in. The CIA believes that there's 13,000 North Koreans, which is the largest conventional deployment of troops to Europe. There's no historical precedent for it, really. When you look through history, like North Koreans or Asian troops on the European soil, there's really
it's also funny that the very people advocating isolationism are the ones worried about de-dollarization. Lol, like, make your mind up if you want to interact with the world or not. I mean, I think the idea is that we can keep our world reserve currency, but while not having this same amount of military spread around the world. And I do think that is true to a point, but the idea that we could retract from the world militarily and not participate in, say, making sure like waterways are open for trade, and especially with the incoming administration, we talk about things like the independence of the Federal Reserve. Honestly, I think that's much more important for de-dollarization. I think if the Federal Reserve gets kneecapped, and it starts becoming like politicized, and it's like, okay, we need to bring down the interest rates right now, and we need to do it right now because we need to make sure that people can borrow so we can get this short-term economic growth, so we can get the numbers for the jobs report. If we start doing that and we prioritize that short-term economic benefit for the current administration over the long-term economic health and keeping that 2% goal rate, then I think that could actually discourage using the U.S. dollar as the Federal Reserve currency, as the U.S. Reserve, as a global reserve currency, and that could end up doing more impact to de-dollarization. Not to say that of course, we need our allies to spend more. I think there's one thing that's bipartisan, and every single person agrees with, from the defense community to basically everyone on Capitol Hill, is that American allies need to spend more on their own defense. And that due to the fact that America has been so powerful post-World War II, and we kind of crushed our own real main rival post-Cold War, they've been largely just betting on the idea that if something happens, don't worry, big bad America and its nukes will come over. And that cannot be the perception moving forward. It can't be the perception moving forward, both because America has, if America's preoccupied somewhere else, it's going to be much more difficult for the United States to get involved, but also because we don't have the endless spending capacity to continuously just supplement European or Southeast Asian defense forever. We just don't. That doesn't mean we can't supplement it at all, but obviously there's going to have to be more spending in Europe. And I worry when I hear about Olaf Scholz talking about how the war in Ukraine has affected their prosperity, that they're still not ready for the responsibility of, defending the continent as they, talk about the values of the European Union and standing with Ukraine till the end, until you see the investments both in European defense manufacturing, European defense, and Ukrainian defense manufacturing. Let me tell you, $1 in Ukrainian defense manufacturing will go much further and much farther than anywhere else in Europe. Point blank, period. The regulations are lower. The factories are working 24/7 in a way that they're not working in Europe. And, they're under much more pressure to get stuff out. Not to mention, like, the employees are paid less because the cost of living is lower, so your dollar can go much further. $1 in Chinese defense production can go further than $1 in American defense production. And this is something that is not calculated when people talk about how much America versus China is spending on defense. But if you were to actually calculate for that, Chinese defense, when you talk about per value, the value they're getting out of those dollars, actually makes up a lot of the gap between American defense spending versus Chinese defense spending. If you account for that, in the same way, you can apply that to Europe and European defense manufacturing versus Ukrainian defense manufacturing.
Really,
remember the last time?
This is the battle with Ukraine and Russia. Just to touch base.
Dylan, why is your camera flipped? My camera's flipped? What makes you think my camera's flipped? Why do I... Is this not... What? I feel... It's not flipped, is it? Now you're making me suck. No, my camera's not flipped.
This is, even in their pamphlets, as you're saying, they are now putting it in North Korean for hopefully to grab defectors. Like, hey, yo, what's up? If you come over here, you get 3 hots in a cot. We won't do anything. And
we do calculate for that, Dylan. We're Perun nerds here. Okay, well, some of you guys calculate for that, but when people like put the big graphs on Twitter, like whatever.
Korean soldiers know how fucking shit it is. So if they hear that, it is the idea. It's like, hey, if you surrender, fucking we'll take care of you on this.
They put them on a cargo ship. They shipped them to Vladivostok. They put them on the longest railroad trains. I saw a comment on one of the videos I did, and it was like, these troops went from
Sorry, this is unrelated, but can I just read this headline? Iran sent a written message via Swiss diplomats in mid-October saying that they would not seek to kill Donald Trump, according to a U.S. official. The Iranians have been, since the death of Soleimani, they've been like pumping out so much propaganda about like animations of them killing Trump on the golf course and all this crazy stuff. Man, and I heard there was even some like ideas about how they were going to do. It's not an issue I've looked into too deeply, but yeah, no, the Iranians really wanted to whack the orange man.
I saw a comment on one of the videos I did, and it was like, these troops went from not seeing anywhere outside their country.
Dylan, who should I vote for in the German snap election in February 25th? Oh God, why are you throwing your responsibility of voting to me? Look, I don't know enough about German domestic politics because I'm a Yankee, right? I feel that I probably agree more with the Social Democrats on economic domestic issues, but I agree more with the CDU when it comes to Ukraine policy. Because the CDU seems more willing to give the Ukrainians more leverage and free reign to use the tools at their disposal, like Tartarus, etc. And I just think that they'd probably be stronger on the issue, generally speaking. So, I don't know. Even if it's the party of Merkel, it's still better on the issue. But I mean, it's pretty clear that the CDU is probably going to win. So I think you should be thinking about it as a coalition government, because it's not going to be like 50% CDU. So you got to think, who do you want? If you don't like the CDU because you're not a MERS fan or you're not a fan of their economic domestic policies or whatever, then I would say think about who would you want to partner with that conservative government. Who would you want to see in there? Do you just want to see the likely CDU Social Democrat coalition, or do you want to see a kind of almost reverse traffic light coalition, and is going to be CDU, Social Democrats, and Greens? So I'd probably end up voting for, if it was me, probably Social Democrats or something, the SPD. Maybe the Greens. The Greens have been pretty good on Ukraine policy. So I think Greens or SPD, I'd maybe lean towards the Greens just because they've been much better on Ukraine policy. On an off year where this was not an issue, I'd probably vote SPD. But I mean, I'm not a German. Plus, the SPD does have some people who are pretty weak on Ukraine in it that are pulling Olaf Scholz one way. But now that the FDP is gonna hit the curb and Christian Lindner is out, the people who are the worst on spending on Ukraine policy are out of the traffic light coalition. JP, thank you so much for the $2. Your camera's in mirror mode, as always. Oh, it's always been like this then. Okay, well, sorry, I'm a boomer when it comes to this stuff. I don't know. We'll figure it out a different day. Today's not the day to figure this out.
Country to suddenly being on the longest railroad track in the world.
Well, maybe they're just backpacking to find themselves.
That is a journey of self-discovery. Oh my God.
Oh my
Imagine the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, North Korea.
The Sisterhood of the Traveling XXXS Pants.
My favorite North Korea rumor, and it's all rumors at this point because you don't really know what's true and not, is the rumor that I mean, I know the North Koreans are there. Everyone knows at this point. The satellite photos are pretty clear. But my favorite rumor about them is that the North Koreans had never had access to the smut before. You know, internet smut, XXXX. You get the idea. And so they've all found it at the same time, and so now they're all addicted and all gooning like hell.
This is an autistic episode. I love it so much.
The prerequisite knowledge for
the North Korean Gooner brigades, man. Oh my gosh.
Half the jokes on this podcast.
The gun's jammed. It's sticky. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry.
So happy right
They're
now.
in. They are so deep, these jokes. Then you need to be in. You need to be on the in.
It's crazy seeing that, like, because I didn't even know that was going on. You brought that up recently, and then you were talking how many defectors maybe have happened at this time.
The interesting part is that it's already like Russians are complaining about how do we integrate these guys? We've only got 3 interpreters for every 30 of them.
It was like 33 they've got a few interpreters for 30. It was 33 people per like 2 or 3 interpreters. It was a wild rate. Oh my God.
So what Ukraine is basically intercepting their
Oh, and there is some bitterness amongst other Russian units. It's like, we need that equipment. Why are they getting the equipment? They don't even speak the language, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, they have a manpower problem, you know, just like everybody in this war has a manpower problem. And so if the North Koreans can have a small tactical impact in holding the line to free up other units, which would be the easiest and simplest way to use them without risking them getting caught, which I don't know if the North Koreans care much about that, but that'd be the easiest way to do it. Or at least they could still be an attack on position. They could still get caught, but there'd be less likelihood of that happening. That still frees up Russian personnel to engage in offensive operations. What's the Russians obviously right now desperately want to push out the Ukrainians before February of next year, before January, before Trump's even sworn in of next year. So that's useful. That's useful. I don't think like on a gigantic strategic level it's changed the war, but on the small tactical level in that area, it's had an impact. It will probably have an impact.
Transmissions, and they're already seeing what the Russians are saying. The Russians are already like derogatorily referring to them as the Chinese. They're already like not down with it. Because I remember when I was in Iraq, like we had the Iraqi force with us and we didn't always refer to them politely. But my point is,
Haji isn't a racial slur. Remember that, folks. It's a,
thank you.
it's a Muslim.
I think
I was
we
thinking
made it.
Alibaba.
I was like, no.
It was a character on Johnny Quest.
No.
Alibaba.com
It's a Muslim
is
who's
very
completed
popular.
their pilgrimage to Mecca.
Dude, as a kid, Johnny Quest was on TV. It was not my show. What it was like, it would be on TV. I'd watch it, was whatever. But then I got a little older, and then I worked at a summer camp. It was like one of my first like job type things. It was job type things. It wasn't a job. It was like an extra credits thing that I had to do to graduate, and so I was just doing it for extra credits. But it was whatever. And I had to watch Johnny Test again, and man, I know there's the memes online about like the whip in it, but they really just the whip every 5 seconds. That sound effect just. It was brain numbing. It broke my ear. It was breaking my eardrums. It was horrible. It was awful. Dylan, who are these chuds? In the middle is Chris Cappy. He's the YouTuber Task and Purpose. And to the left of him is Brandon Herrera. He is a gun YouTuber who is most notable for the political world as he ran for Congress recently. He lost the primary against a Republican incumbent, even though it was a very close race. And he had much less money, so, you know, he had some momentum. Trumper, as far as I'm aware. The rest of them I do not know. 2 baseball cap fellas and undiagnosed. That's what's on his shirt, so he's just undiagnosed to me.
Here we go.
I'm sure we said the same about
Inshallah.
everything throughout time.
No, but it's crazy, but we're not.
Mixing up Johnny Quest with Johnny Test. Johnny Quest. What's Johnny Quest? I'm sorry. I'm a boomer, but I'm also a youngin'. 1 second. Johnny Quest. Oh yeah. I'm sorry, man. I've seen this before. Yeah. Yeah. No. I'm not born in 1960, so this is not my show. So I thought of Johnny Test. Man, I really shown my age there.
We're not even like thinking about how crazy it is because it is involving the Pacific in the European conflict.
There's got another person in chat calling Herrera an AK-47 fetishist. My gosh. There's a trend in chat. You guys don't like his loyalty to the AR. I mean, the AK. My goodness.
And it's like, so then at the same time, also the Middle East is popping off. And it's kind of, so to the normie, to the regular war enjoyer.
Enjoyer? That was really drawn out.
Did you say that in British?
Are you guys not from New York? You might look at that and think like we're in World War III, but also I would also like to remind everybody that there's other points in history where, you know, the Korean War, you could look at that and also think, wow, World War III is about to pop off from that perspective because you had, you know, China was literally fighting U.S. troops, UN troops. It was almost hotter back then.
Vietnam with the French and the
right, and also the Berlin, like the East and the West, the Soviet Union versus the West was.
Man, you think people now, when they're saying, I don't want the world to blow up over Ukraine, you think that can get repetitive? You should have been around back and, I don't want to blow up the world over Berlin, where we fight them, and now we're going to blow up the world over Berlin after we did. Man, people were, oof. And the Europeans thought about that too. It was a constant topic of, would the Americans be willing to pull the trigger on atomic weapons for Paris? They'd do it for New York, but would they risk New York for Paris? And that was a question that our European allies asked. It's part of the reason why the French and the British pursued atomic weapons, because they couldn't really have that certainty, and so they tried to balance the field. It's why also we deployed our atomic weapons in Europe. It's because we, number one, definitely early on in the Cold War, fighting the Soviet Union just straight up in Europe was very difficult without atomic weapons, just due to the scale of the force that they had. But also it dissuaded them more through those weapons being in the purview there. But it was a constant turn of phrase is the word, but it was a constant topic of, would the Americans risk New York, Washington, D.C. for Paris, for Berlin, for London, etc.
Way hotter too. So, it's bad right now, but also there's hope.
However, the casualty list in the last 2 years.
It's
in terms of them, Russia and Ukraine.
Russia and Ukraine, yeah.
Like that's brutal.
It's pretty brutal compared to most conflicts. And if you're,
and we're breaking records right now. Like 2 or 3 days ago, it was the highest Ukrainian reported, from Ukrainian sources, mind you, the Ukrainian forces, that is, highest reported death toll for the Russians, like casualty total for the Russians, I think for the entire war, it was roughly 2,000. It was 1,950 to be precise. That's crazy. And honestly, I think it's likely that record is going to be broken again in the next month or two, because the Russians are pushing in Kursk and they desperately want to get the Ukrainians out. And I see the footage there, and they are pushing with what they have, and they're taking high casualties, but they're not stopping. They're pushing in the Kupiansk direction because they want to push to the Oskil River, and they're pushing hard, and they've actually kind of entered the outskirts of Kupiansk recently, even though the Ukrainians are trying to keep them out. I think the Ukrainians said they pushed them out, but who knows? You got them pushing in the Donetsk region, as they're always pushing. And now we've got reports of increased bombings in Zaporizhia, and they might push towards Orikhiv. They might push in the south. And that means the Russians are basically pushing, or if they push in Zaporizhia, they'd be pushing on every single front except for Kherson, where the human safari is going on. A different type of brutality.
You're adding now to the fact that, like, okay, America
and
is,
there's a question of not only the pressure Ukraine's under, because the Russians want them to buckle, want them to break, and want somewhere on the line. If you put pressure everywhere, you find the weak point, it breaks, and you flood in troops. But there's wait 1 second. Oh yeah, there's also a question of sustainability, Russians punching themselves out. They want to get to the negotiation table in January in the best position possible. But there's also the problem that if in January nothing happens and the Russians just spent all of the winter, some of those brutal months for fighting, where it's going to be mud season, going to be difficult for these mechanized assaults going into, when mud season comes around, they might end up actually straining the resources to a point where if the war extends or goes on, it's going to be more difficult for them. So, but who knows? Who knows?
You want to say directly or indirectly involved? We're there. Mm-hmm. And now the Asian continent is getting involved. It's like, all right, well, we're brewing all the ingredients right now. The biggest question is, like, how do we non-escalate?
So I tried to.
I think that's the wrong question. How about, how do we escalate, good sir? How do we... Okay, I'm kidding. But I mean, here's a question. When we say non-escalate, let's be clear that doing nothing sometimes is incentivizing escalation. Because if they just escalate and we do nothing, and then they escalate again and we do nothing again, then are you, by doing nothing, helping or hurting the trying to stop escalation? If they are able to introduce a whole other army into the war, invading with Asian troops, invading with North Korean troops, and there's no response. And up so far, I really think there's been very little to no response. What would stop them from expanding that? expanding that. It's not 13,000, now 20,000, now 25,000, now it's 30,000. Now we're not talking about a small tactical impact. We're talking about a large tactical impact that could become a larger strategic impact depending on how much they throw into it. And so you need a counterance to let them know. I know the South Koreans have gone up and told the Russians that, you know, the more you go in, the more likely we are to dial up our support for Ukraine. But I don't know if they have the legislative majority to do that, but that is one potential response where the Ukrainians can get, you know, South Korea is, I think, the 4th or 5th largest arms supplier in the world. And they produce a lot of NATO standard equipment. Particularly interesting for Ukraine, 155 millimeter, which Ukraine needs.
To a little bit sometimes put myself in the shoes of like someone in Poland. And
I love the Polish.
Right? They're beautiful people.
Oh, I love the Polish.
God bless them. So what would we do if, so the distance between, I'm going to get this wrong, but I think it's like, what is it? The distance between Warsaw and the front lines is as if you were traveling from here to North Carolina. I think, sorry, from New York to North Carolina. I believe it's about
They also got that little slice, what is it, Kaliningrad or whatever?
If you ask Tony Gonzalez, not far.
Imagine though you're driving 8 hours. You're like, man, it's a beautiful Sunday. You want to go see war, and you drive 8 hours to a frontline conflict.
You wouldn't even have to trade off unless you were like pussies and you can't even like do an 8-hour drive. Come on, that's like
crazy as the capital of a first world country.
Yeah.
I say that because I couldn't.
But yeah, no, he's absolutely right. Like,
oh, poor souls. They don't know about the checkpoints. Oh, you think it's just going to be 8 hours? Oh, you poor, poor soul. You poor, poor soul.
Poland has been arming to the fucking teeth. Like, and I don't know where they're getting all this money from, but Poland is the most like militarily expansive and explosive country that I've ever seen. Like, compared to everybody ever.
Well, I've made this joke in the podcast before, but I'm like, for like 50 years, their country didn't exist.
Yeah,
because
that's
of, you know, people basically, they are the fucking, if you have two pit bulls playing tug of war, that's Poland.
Yeah.
Brandon, I think we could probably, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like we could probably agree that like those European countries, it'd be nice if they paid more towards their defense.
Well, I think that's where a lot of the America First movement kind of like gets irritated with that, where it's like, you guys are way closer to the conflict, and the United States is one of the few countries that actually
donates,
completes their agreement to NATO.
Was it 2.5% or something to NATO?
Which should be
of GDP.
Yeah, of GDP.
Yeah.
And we
where
do.
It's like we do.
But also the countries that are most at risk for the war, if something goes wrong, like Poland is way blowing out. Like they're blowing it out. They're like going towards 3%. In the amount of countries either on the path to 2% or have reached 2% has increased since the war. You could debate on whether that was American diplomatic pressure, as some American politicians have claimed, or it is the pressure of the largest war in Europe since World War II, which I would wager to say, now maybe it's from my perspective here in Ukraine, I think a much larger motivating factor. But yes, I also agree. They need to pay more. They need to pay more.
Yeah, we're right behind. Estonia was the top of their GDP, and then Poland, and then us.
But that, like most of the countries,
and the thing is, they're also going to have to coordinate production. They're going to have to coordinate production, because I mean, they're all the shells that they produce. Whatever. I don't want to get too detailed into it. Point is, Europeans need to spend more on defense, more in defense production, and I think they should be sponsoring more Ukrainian defense companies as well.
in Europe that are part of NATO don't give a fuck. They don't contribute. They don't, because you're supposed to be contributing a certain percentage of your GDP toward military defense per year.
But then their flip side.
I feel it's a little reductive because it depends on which country. If you're talking about Poland, you're on a totally different spectrum. If you're talking about, I mean, this is not a European country. If you're talking about Canada, totally other end of the spectrum. Oof.
That is one of the issues that was raised was there's no punishment for not doing it, right?
I mean, well, we haven't so far.
Now most of them reach 2% at this point, but the thing is 2% really should be 4%. So that's kind of the goalpost is moving.
The number that they're talking about now is 3%, whether they should bring it up to 3%, which I mean, like, maybe if we didn't have the largest war in Europe since World War II, maybe, but we have the largest war in Europe since World War II. And if Poland can do it, I don't know why the French couldn't do it. I don't know why the Germans couldn't necessarily do it. Well, you know, I know why they couldn't, because of the FTP recently. They're just afraid of any debt. Debt is the devil. Debt, if you take debt, you will die. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but when you heard Lindner talk about it and his proposals, it did feel like that was his position. Are you going to be in the U.S. for the inauguration? Yes, because I'm going to be home for Christmas, and then I'll be in for January, February, and I'll probably come back March. Yeah. Wait, Sparky, I see you in chat. Sparky, you said that I should be registered as a foreign agent on Twitter. I saw that. You coming in here with the smiles and giggles. I should be a foreign agent. I need to register with FARA.
But
I think Estonia spent almost 10%. Like, it's crazy high what Estonia spent. I mean, but Estonia's right there.
They're
with
right on the
Poland.
front.
Like, they're. I think Estonia borders.
Estonia is.
Hey, they got the shout out. Thank goodness. They're shouting out the Eastern Europeans.
I mean, but Estonia's right there.
They're
with
right on the
Poland.
front.
Like, they're. I think Estonia borders.
Estonia is the fucking battered women's shelter of the USSR.
Yeah,
like that's. I get why they're fucking upset.
I think America should spend like. Imagine if we spent 30%, the toys we could have.
Okay, now they're just playing around. You should, but we should hang for the inauguration. You're gonna be in D.C.? You're not storming the Capitol this time, are you, Sparky? Don't got a reason this time? You didn't storm it last time either? Oh, sure. You just filmed it. Ah, yes. I filmed it too. I was just in my Biden hoodie on Jan 6. That's the I still can't believe I did that. You can find that footage. You look enough for it online. You can still find the stream. It's kind of at J6 in a Biden hoodie. What a day. You made $26,000 that day? Damn, aircraft. I didn't make that type of money that day. My God, I didn't make anything close to that type of money that day. You lucky bastard. Anyway, you know, I understand where Brandon Herrera is coming from when it comes to defense. The amount of spending that the Europeans need to be at. I do think that the World War III concerns, generally speaking, are kind of overblown. And I don't mean to say there's not a risk, but the way that it's talked about, I feel like it's always without context of the previous security crises we've had that have been more intense than this. And we've been able to get through it. And it also doesn't keep in perspective the amount of red lines that have been crossed and the lack of reaction to those red lines and certain red lines we haven't hit yet. For example, like there's been no gigantic test to like show that this is what we will do if you go any further, like certain signals that could be sent. There's been no hard red line where the Russians say, you do this and we will nuke you. And the main use of these atomic weapons is not through their actual implementation where you fire them off and you take out DC because America pissed you off in a sanction policy or a trade deal or whatever. It's through the fact that you passively have them and the leverage it gives you in interacting with the rest of the world because you have the power of the sun, right? And having the power of the sun is cool until you use it, and then they use the power of the sun back at you. So its main use is diplomatically. That's why the Ukrainians are thinking about getting these weapons so they could use it as a deterrence against the Russians invading again. So I think that the fact that they haven't set those red lines yet also indicates like a flexible atomic threat policy meant to dissuade increases in aid, but is not really committed to any pull of the trigger because pulling of the trigger would be a disaster for everyone involved. And it wouldn't just be a disaster for the Russians, like for the fact that they could get nuked back in return, but let's say they nuke Ukraine and they don't get nuked back in return. I don't think the Chinese or the Indians are going to support them through that. They're not. The Indians have their own reasons for not wanting nuclear nonproliferation degraded and having it so atomic weapons are used in offensive warfare, and the Chinese do too. They want to keep the North Koreans on a short leash, and the Indians have the Pakistanis to worry about, and the Pakistanis in return have the Indians to worry about. It was an okay talk. It was an okay talk. I like that guy's shirt. thrive under chaos with the little raccoon with the flamethrower. That's pretty cool. I want all federal authorities to know that I, Dylan Burns, believe 9/11 was bad